Good morning. Welcome to the Syncfusion webinar, File Format Manipulation in Xamarin.Forms. My name is Marisa Keller-Outen. I'm the Director of Business Development here at Syncfusion and your moderator for today's webinar. Our presenter today is Aaron Melamed, Product Solutions Specialist at Syncfusion. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly tell you a bit about Syncfusion. Syncfusion delivers an extensive range of over 800 web, mobile, and desktop controls. We also empower businesses to get the most out of their data with our enterprise solutions, including the dashboard and big data platforms. We've been in business for over 15 years and are headquartered in the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina in the U.S. Syncfusion has more than 12,000 customers, including large financial institutions, Fortune 100 companies, and global IT consultancies. More than 900,000 users from 125 countries trust Syncfusion in their development process. Now that you know a bit more about us, I'll hand this over to Aaron to get started.
Alright, so in today's demo we're going to be looking at Syncfusion's rich file format manipulation libraries for Excel, Word, PowerPoint, and PDF. Just as you would expect on desktop and web applications, there are many times where you need to export or convert certain files to specific formats in a mobile application. Today we're going to be looking at some common use cases for these file manipulation libraries in Xamarin.Forms. We'll step through the code of a few examples in each format, going over things such as the syntax of each format, as well as saving to the local file storage of each device. Before we dive into the code, I want to first demonstrate the sample application we'll be looking at. So in this case, I'm using the UWP version of this application, but of course this being Xamarin.Forms, this will also work on Android and iOS. So this sample application contains examples of the major features of each file library. For the purposes of today's demo, we'll only have time to go over the basic examples of each library. However, once we make the application available to everyone, you'll have access to all of the examples included, so you'll be able to explore the more advanced examples on your own. Alright, now let's move into the demonstration. We're going to start with XLSIO, which is the Excel file library, and we're going to be looking at two use cases here. First, generating the basic file, Excel file from scratch, and then also adding a chart to an existing Excel file. Before we look at the code, I'm going to first generate the Excel file from the basic example, just so you know what we're going to be looking at in the code. So I'm just going to go ahead and save this, and it's going to pop up in Excel for me. So here's the Excel file that we're going to be generating through the code. You can see here that this is a simple expense report Excel file, and it contains some basic information, just standard text and a couple of numerical values. It also contains, or also makes use of the sum formula so that we actually get some total calculations for each of these columns. So again, we'll be looking at how this is done in the code. So let's go ahead and step through that right now. So here in Visual Studio, we're going to be looking at the Create Spreadsheet page file. So you'll find that inside of the XLSIO folder, and again it's called Create Spreadsheet page. And this is the main example, or the default example in XLSIO. So starting on line 73, the first thing we need to do is create a new instance of the Excel engine. Once we've done that, we can move on and start initiating the workbook. So if we move down to line 81, you'll see that we create a new workbook. And in this method for creating a new workbook, we have the ability to also pass in an integer value, and that is to allow us to set how many worksheets are inside of this workbook. So the next thing we do is, because we've created a single worksheet in this workbook, we then create a variable to assign that default, or that one worksheet to. So we're calling that default worksheet just sheet, and then we'll be using that going forward. So now starting on line 89, we can start to define some of the aspects of this Excel file. So on lines 89 through 92, what we're doing is we're defining the column width of the first 4 columns in our Excel file. Then on line 94, you can see that we take that range and merge them. So we create one cell out of those 4 columns. Next, we actually take that initial cell, so the cell A2, which is now a combined cell, a merged cell, and then we call its text property and assign it to a string. And so now we've added the expense report header to our Excel file. From here, we start to apply formatting to that header. So you can see that we're now calling the cell style property of the A2 cell, and we're starting to set things like the font name, its font weight, the font size, the font color, as well as its alignment. Now if we move on, lines 105 to 114, we're essentially doing the same thing again. So we're following that same pattern to add another line of text, and we're also setting its font style, so font name, font weight, font size, etc. And so we follow the same pattern until we hit line 126. I'm sorry, line 125. So on line 125, we see that we're adding something different. So we're no longer adding text, we're actually adding date time. And so the way this works is we first call the cell's number format property, and we set it, in this case, to a date format. And so then on line 125, we actually call the date time property and set that to the value of this parsed date time. So we're setting it to the parsed value of October 10th, 2012. And so the reason why we're doing that is so that when we load this file in Excel, it will correctly read that cell value and as a date. So it'll apply the correct cell formatting to that cell, and that way you can perform all the relevant actions to it. Now moving on, we see some similar code here on line 129. Except this time we're specifying a currency format. So we're still calling the cell's number format property, but this time we're setting it to a currency format. And then you can see on line 130 where we actually set the value of it. In this case, 70 cents. And again, we're doing that so that when we load this into Excel, it will correctly format that as currency as opposed to just a regular number or a date or some other number format. All right, so from here we continue building out the worksheet by setting simple text numerical values until we reach line 162. Here you can see again we're doing something a little bit different. So this is the first time we call or we put in a formula. So the way this works is we set the cell's formula property to that of a simple formula. In this case, you can see we're simply multiplying the values of cell B7 with that of cell B10. And you can see in a note that we are using the same exact formula syntax that you'd expect to use in Excel itself. So we're not doing anything special here. And so the next time this shows up is down on line 180. So between these two lines, 162 and 180, we're simply adding additional numbers into these various cells. And then finally, when we reach line 180, we're taking that last cell in that column and we're adding up all the values. So we're doing a sum. And once again, you can see that we're using the standard Excel formula syntax in order to use that formula. So you don't have to learn any kind of special syntax in order to use this. You can use the syntax you already know and love from Excel. All right, so from here we continue following that pattern to fill out the rest of the columns in that table in the Excel file. And so everything is pretty much the same until we hit line 233. So once we get to this point, what we do is we create a memory stream. So here we're preparing to actually save the workbook as a memory stream in order to then save it to the device. So first thing we do is set or create a memory stream. Then we save our workbook to that stream. Once it's saved, we are then able to close the workbook and dispose of the Excel engine in order to free those resources. From there, on lines 238 to 241, we have all the code necessary to actually save the file to the device. So here what we're using is a simple if statement to use the correct, in this case, Xamarin.Forms dependency service to apply the correct saving interface for the appropriate device. So in this case, if it's a Windows phone, we're using the iSave Windows Phone interface in order to save that file to that device. And for everything else, Android and iOS, we're using the iSave interface. And you can see here the only parameters we're passing in are the name of the file and its file type, as well as, of course, the stream that contains the actual workbook. And that's it. That's all it really takes to generate an Excel file. So it's just 3 basic steps. First, you define your workbook, you format and populate the worksheets in that workbook, and then you save it to a file. So next, we're going to look at how to insert a chart into an Excel file. We'll also use this example to demonstrate how you can use a template in your projects. In this case, we'll use an existing Excel workbook to provide the data we'll be visualizing with our chart. And so before I jump into the code, I'm just going to once again show you what we're going to be working with here. So I'm going to view the input template so you can see what this template actually looks like. So all we have here is a blank spot where we're going to add our chart, and underneath it we have the data that chart is going to pull from. All right, so let's get back into Visual Studio. And now we can start pouring through the code. So we're going to start on line 83. And you can see here that the first difference between the previous example and this one is we're not immediately creating a workbook. Instead, we're setting the resource path to excuse me, our template, and then we're getting the link to that path. And so we're using that to create a file stream, and then we'll use that to import that template as our workbook. So you can see here we created a workbook variable, and then we're assigning it to essentially the result of opening that file stream. From there, we can then assign our sheet variable to the default or the one and only worksheet that is in that file. So we're just doing that here, assigning the sheet variable to the default worksheet. And then that's all we need to do. So now we're able to generate our chart. So the first thing we do is we assign our chart variable to a new chart essentially. And then from there we can then start to set the properties for that chart. The very first thing we need to do here on line 96 is set the data range for that chart. So again, we're just pulling the data that already exists in the template we just imported. So we're simply inputting the range of cell A16 to E26. From there we can set the chart's title. In this case we're actually setting it to the value of an existing cell inside of that template. So we're just pulling the text value from cell A15. We're not going to be using a legend, so we set this value to false. And then the next 4 properties here, these are the values that position that chart inside of our Excel file. One way to think of this is that we are setting the top left and bottom right corners of the chart. And then those two values are essentially split into 2 properties. So the top row here, we're setting it to the 3rd row in the Excel file, and underneath the first column. So this is essentially column or cell A3. And then from there we're setting the right column to 6 and the bottom row to 15. And then that will equal the bottom right corner. And that's it. So from there it's basically the same code that we saw before with the previous example. So one thing I did forget to mention previously though is that we are also able to set our workbook version. And so in this case we're setting it to Excel version 2013, and this will affect any create methods essentially for the Excel engine. So anytime you generate a workbook, it will save it as that file type. And so again, here we're creating our memory stream, saving our workbook to it, closing it, disposing of the Excel engine, and then once again we have the same code we saw before for saving that file to our device. And so once we've run through this, this is the result that we get. So come back here, we're going to generate this Excel file. And now you can see with that little bit of code, just those few lines to generate that chart, we've added a nicely formatted and easy to read chart, and it's positioned exactly where we want. All right, so next we're going to be looking at the doc.io library. So this is for creating Word documents. So first, let's start with the basic syntax of creating a document. I'm going to first actually demonstrate what we're going to be generating with our code. So I'm going to be using the getting started example of this in this application. So we're going to generate this file. As before, it's going to ask me to save it, and then it's going to open up in Word. And this is the file we're going to be generating through our code. So you can see here it actually contains multiple elements. There are several different font styles being used here. There's also several images. There's even a table at the bottom. So without further ado, let's go ahead and look at the code for that. Alright, so we're going to start on line 70. And here we have another difference between our XLSIO library and virtually every other library that we have. So instead of creating some sort of engine or creating an instance of some sort of document engine, here we're simply creating a new instance of the document itself. So you can see here we're creating a new Word document. And then from there on line 74, we're adding a new section to that document. On line 76, we're setting up the overall margin for the document. And then on line 78, we're setting the page size. You can see here that this is of type Syncfusion drawing, and these values are measured in points. And that'll be consistent throughout all of our document libraries. Generally speaking, all the values will be measured in points. So next on lines 81 through 98, here, we define some paragraph styles that we're going to use in the rest of the document. So on line 81, for example, we create our first style called normal. And then the following lines down to 86 simply define what that normal paragraph style is. So it defines the font name, font size, the spacing before and after that paragraph, as well as the line spacing within it. On line 88, we add a second style called heading 1, and again, the next several lines will define what that font style is. So now starting on line 98, we actually begin to add our first paragraph into the document. And so the first thing that we do here is we actually add an image into the document. So we're creating an image stream or a file stream of that image, and we're passing it along to the append picture method of the paragraph. So here we have our paragraph, the append picture method, and then the image stream. Once we've imported our picture, then we can start to assign or set its properties. So here we can set the text wrapping style, its origin, its position, as well as its scale. So next, we add a text range. So inside of our paragraph, we're now adding a text range. And a text range is actually going to contain our text, our first line of text rather. So here you can see that we're appending the text string Adventure Work Cycle, which is the title of our document. And then from there, we can take that text range and change the properties of that string. So we're able to change its font size, its font name, its text color, etc. And then from here, we start to follow that same pattern where we're adding paragraphs and then text ranges to those paragraphs, which include various strings to kind of build out that document. So starting on line 149, we have something a little bit different. This is where we actually start to generate that table. So on line 149, we create the table itself, and then we assign, and then we set its size. So in this case, we're setting, by calling the reset cells method, we're able to set the size of the table. So in this case, it's going to be 3 rows and 2 columns. So this is very similar to setting up a grid if you're familiar with that. And so once we've set the size of our table, that we can then assign its property. So here we have our border property, which we're selling to none, and we're also setting its auto resize to true so that it can size itself based on the content within the table. So next, we add our first paragraph, and we assign it a position within that table. So it's going to be in the first row of the first column, so cell 00. We add our paragraph, and then inside of that paragraph, we're going to add an image stream. And so we're going to follow the same pattern we saw earlier where we added the first image inside of the document. That first image was the logo for the document, and this next image we're adding here is the first image we see in that table with one of the bicycles, one of the products that we're demonstrating in that sample document. And so as I mentioned, we're going to follow the same pattern we saw before. So we import our image via this image stream, and then we start to assign or set its properties such as its origin, wrapping style, scale, and position. Next, we add another paragraph in the adjacent cell, so row 0 but column 1, so the second column, and this time we're adding some text. So we're appending some text to our paragraph, in this case the name of the product. And then if we keep going, we add another paragraph, and inside of that paragraph we're going to add some text ranges. And this way we're able to add essentially multiple lines of text, one after the other. So the text ranges allow us to do that, and also to individually format each line if we wanted to. In this case we're actually applying the same font size and font names, but if we wanted to we could of course change that up. And then we continue to follow that same pattern for the rest of the table. So you can see here we're following the same pattern, we're repeating the same bits of code essentially until we've generated or populated all the cells inside of our table. And so then we get to lines in the 296, and you will see the familiar memory stream line where we create a new memory stream. We save our document to that stream, and then we have the same code we saw before in order to save the file to the device's local storage. And so again, we have a simple if statement where if we're using a Windows phone, we use one interface versus everything else, Android and iOS, where we use iSave. So as you can see, creating a Word document with multiple elements such as formatted text, images, and even tables is actually pretty straightforward. It's a pretty straightforward affair with Syncfusion's doc.io library. So next we'll be looking at creating a simple PowerPoint file using the presentation library. So as before we actually dive into the code, we're going to look at a sample of what we're going to be creating. So you have a visual of what we're going with. In this case, I'm actually going to skip the getting started example since that's just a simple text-based slide. And I'm going to go to the images slide since this will actually be a 2-slide document. So let me go ahead and generate that. One containing just text and the other containing both text and images. So you can see here our main slide is just a text. And then our second slide here contains text on the left and a big image on the right. Also notice that in this case we're also using two different slide layouts, and we'll actually see how that was done in the code. So let's go ahead and bring that up. So we're going to start on lines 72 to 77, and here you can see that once again we're bringing in a template. And again, a template really is nothing more than just a pre-existing file. In this case it's going to be a PowerPoint file. Previously in the Excel example it was an existing Excel file. So in this case we're bringing in a template for the PowerPoint file, and let me just show you what that template is so you can see what we're working with. So I'm going to open up this existing template file. You can see here that it's nothing more than just a single slide with no content. And so that is what we're starting with. So we create our presentation object by assigning it to that file stream, so the file stream that points to that template that I just showed. And then we assign our slide variable to the default or the only slide that's in that file. So presentation.slides at index 0 is going to be slide 1. And then inside of slide 1 we have a default shape, and that we assign to the shape variable that we have here on line 82. So now lines 84 through 87 we are actually setting the position for that default shape. So shape 1 we're able to assign its top and left corners as well as its width and height. So next on lines 92 through 104 we actually begin to define the text body of shape 1. And again, we're still working on slide 1, which is just that slide that has that single line of text. So inside of slide 1 we have shape 1, and inside of shape 1 we have what's called the shape body. A shape body can contain a collection of paragraphs, which we have here, and then each paragraph can contain a collection of text parts. The text parts are going to be the actual containers of the text itself. So you can see here in this case, because again we have a very simple slide with just one line of text, we have one paragraph, and then inside of that one paragraph we have one text part. And then once we set the text for that text part, the actual string value, essential presentation, then we can actually start to assign that or set the properties for that text part. And so again, we're just setting things like the font size, font name, font weight, things like that can all be set here under the text part properties. And that's it. That's all we need to do for slide 1, since again it was a pretty simple slide. Next, we need to create slide 2, the one that contained the text and the images. And the way we do that is pretty simple. So we create a variable called slide 2, and we assign it to the result of the add slides method of the presentation object. So in this case, the overload will accept the definition for the slide layout that you wish to use for this new slide. In this case, we're going to use the content with caption slide layout for slide 2. So once we've set that, then we can start to set a few other properties for slide 2. So here we set some background properties. The fill type, which in this case is going to be solid, that's on line 111. Then on line 112, we can see that we're setting the color for that background. In this case, we're just using a white background. So next, we need to access the default shape that is inside of slide 2. So we do what we did before, where we assign our shape1 variable to the default shape inside of slide 2. We set its size and position. And then we can move on to adding content inside of it. So again, we're dealing with our text body or shape bodies inside of the shape. We're adding one paragraph to it. Or actually, we're adding two paragraphs here. So we're calling our variables paragraph 1 and paragraph 2. So in paragraph 1, we're actually adding a text part. And this text part will have, we have multiple paragraphs inside of the first shape, shape inside of the slide, because we're going to have multiple lines of text on that left side. And so that's what we're splitting up here with these paragraphs, paragraphs 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so you can see we're following the same pattern we did before, where we assign the text value of the text part, and then we give it some font styles. And so we do that for each of the paragraphs to build up a nice set of text. And then we can move on to the adding the image inside of that slide. So in slide 2, we do what we did before, where we add a picture by supplying its file stream. So first we get the file stream for the picture, which gives us its location, and then inside of the add picture method for the shapes, we're also able to position the shape. So we're able to position and size the image inside of this method. And that way we're able to set it to the side, the large caption area that was set aside with its layout, and then that's all we need to do. So as you can see here, we're able to close that file stream, and then we can move on to saving the resulting presentation, once again using the same code we saw before. So create a file stream, save the presentation, close the presentation, and then move on to saving it to the appropriate locations on whatever device is being used. So again, as we've seen with the previous examples, it's incredibly easy to work with Syncfusion's presentation library to create beautiful presentations. Now obviously we only created 2 slides in this particular presentation, but you can imagine how easy it is to create additional slides with multiple pieces of content such as text and images. So now the next and final library we're going to look at is our PDF library. So let's jump right into that. So again, first we're going to look at the resulting PDF we're going to be working with, and we are going to be using the Getting Started example from the sample application. And this example will show 2 things, not just creating a PDF via the PDF library, but also how to display it inside of your application. In this sample application, we have the ability to toggle that feature on and off. We're going to leave it on, so when I generate this PDF, you'll see that it renders inside of my application here. So I do not need to first save the file and then open it in an external PDF viewer. I can just use the built-in Syncfusion one. So you can see here the PDF we're going to generate. It contains several sections. It also contains multiple elements such as formatted text, bullet points, so unordered lists, as well as images. So let's go ahead and dive into the code and see how this was done. So again, we're going to be looking at the Getting Started PDF example, so that's the file that we're opening up. And we're going to start on line 91. So we start by actually creating a new PDF document. In this case, we're just calling it doc. On line 95, we set the margins for that for the document itself. And then on line 98, we add a page to the document. So the page is what's actually going to hold the content of the PDF document. So a document can contain multiple pages, and this is how you would add more than one page. Now inside of that page, we're going to create what's called a PDF graphic. So we're just going to assign that to the variable G, and then we're going to also create some PDF font objects to hold some reusable font styles. So we have a header font style and then a subheading font style that we're going to be able to reuse a little bit later. So next, inside of that G, inside of that PDF graphics object, we're going to draw a couple of rectangles. So first, we have a gray rectangle where we set its position. So these first two integer values are the x and y coordinates for that rectangle. We're going to leave it in the center, so 0, 0. And then we also are able to set its width and its height. You can see here in this case that we're actually setting it to the client size width. So we're basically saying make this 100% width, 100% height. And what we're doing here with this gray rectangle is essentially creating the background for the whole document. Now next we create another rectangle, this time a black one, where we leave it in the center once again as far as its default position, but then we set its width to, again, the client size, so 100%, and its height at 130. So this will be a or actually, I'm sorry. When you leave your position at 0, 0, it actually docks to the top instead of the center. So in this case, this black rectangle will show up at the top above the gray rectangle. So we'll have a gray background with a black box on top. And then next we have another rectangle, the white one, which will do the same thing. This time we'll move it down 400 points, and then we'll do the same thing as far as its width and its height. So one thing that is a little bit different about the height is we're taking the client size height and then we're subtracting 450 from it in order to get this both positioned and sized appropriately inside of our document. And again, just to kind of refresh your memory on what that is, here you can see the three boxes we've created. So there's a gray rectangle that goes behind everything. So it shows up here in the middle and again at the bottom. And then at the very top we have our black rectangle, and kind of down here towards the end we have our white rectangle. So in between that, here at the top on lines 110 and also 112, we add some strings. So we call the drawString method, which will add our enterprise text and then our reporting solutions subheading inside of our document. So this is where you apply those previously set font styles, so the header font and the subheading font. We'll go with these two drawstrings. And then we also apply a color to it as well as a position. And these are X and Y coordinates. So underneath the enterprise heading, we also have another rectangle that we've drawn. In this case, it's just a small violet colored rectangle. So you can see here its position. And what that is essentially the background for this subheading, the reporting solutions subheading. So once again, if I pull up the example here, you can see where we have the enterprise heading and then reporting solutions inside of another rectangle, in this case the violet rectangle. All right, so now if you look at, start with line 114, we can start to add some additional content to that first heading at the top. So what we're using here is called a PDF layout result object, and what this gives us access to is essentially the rendered bounds of the previously set element. And so what that will let us do is, for example, we set the first line of text, this develop crowd ready reporting applications line, and we set its position. And then when we do the next line, we do it exactly the same way, except when we set the position, we take the result of the bottom edge of the previous element, and then we add 15 points to it. So we move it down an additional 15 points from the bottom of the previous element. And you can see that we repeat this pattern for all the rest of the lines we have here. And we do that until we reach line 119, where we are now using a different formatting style. So these header points and body content objects, these are actually, or methods rather, these are actually pre-formatted bits of text. So we've come down to the very bottom of the code here. We have this helper region, and you can see where we've laid out what exactly body content and header points are. So that will give us both the formatting for the text as well as the formatting for the essentially the bullet point graphic that goes in front of each one. So coming back to the line 119, you'll see that we are following the same pattern, although we're now using body content to format our text, and we're also adding a bit more space between this element and the one before it. So we add 45 points there, and then going forward, then we space those out at 25 points each. So next we create what's called a PDF pen object. And what this lets us do is essentially set some of the default values for a stroke. So it gives us the color of the stroke as well as the width of it. And where we use that is in the next line, line 126, where we draw a line. So when we draw this line, we give it the stroke parameter, so it's going to be a red colored stroke to width. And then the next set of values that we input are essentially the coordinates for the start and end points of that line. So here we can see that we're giving it a start and end point, and then we're also moving down, then we're then creating text that goes next to it. And again, let me pull up the example so we can see what that's actually doing. So if we look down here underneath this gray box, we have this these set of text boxes here, and next to each one is a line, a colored line. So very similar to a bullet point, except we're not doing this as an ordered or unordered list. We're simply drawing a line next to each of these text boxes, and you can see here we're using that PDF pen object to do that. So first we draw the line, and then next to it we insert our text elements. So in this case we're adding a text element that will contain the text, and then of course we're formatting that text. So we repeat that pattern a couple of times to add each box. So here we have a violet pen with its text, and then we go down to a green pen and a blue pen and so on. So we have all four of those boxes laid out. Then lastly, once we get down to line 172, we get to another image stream. So we're adding another image, just like we have before in all the previous examples, and it basically follows the same format, the same pattern that we've seen before. So we get an image stream, we pass it along to our draw image method, in this case for the graphics element that we created earlier. We pass along this the actual image stream, and of course the coordinates for that image. And then that's pretty much it. So the last thing that we do in this particular example for a PDF is we add a link to it. So we create a PDF text web link object, and then we assign the URL to it, we set its text, and then we format it using its font and brush properties. And once we're done with that, then we can save that resulting document. So once again, we've previously actually created a stream, so we're not seeing it here in the same order that we've seen it before, but there was a memory stream created at the top of this document. We're saving our document to it, and then in this case, because we are taking the extra step of creating or allowing our users to view this PDF document immediately inside of our application, there's this bit of code that starts here at line 192. So if that toggle is set to true, then we are creating an instance of our PDF viewer, and we're setting the document stream property of that PDF viewer to the stream that we saved our PDF to. And then once again, we're using an if statement to do this a little bit differently between Windows Phone and the other platforms. So if we are using Windows Phone, then we will push a new navigation page modally, and if not, then we'll simply do it asynchronously. And so you can see here we're simply pushing a navigation page with our PDF viewer inside of it. And then if our users have not chosen to view the PDF and the directly in the app, then we'll just go default back to our previous save to the device code. So we're saving it to the local storage of our device as we've seen before. And that's it. So that's all it really takes to generate a PDF file and display it within your application.
Aaron, thank you so much for presenting.
No problem.
Yeah, please be sure to watch your email inboxes for a link to the recording of this presentation. And thanks again for your time and interest, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a lovely day.